much for joining me today. My name is Pat Dillon, and our session today is going to be on non-dilutive federal funding for novel early-stage R&D projects that are either in small businesses or startups. And so today's session is probably going to go pretty quickly, and I'm going to get into a little detail, but do know that we also offer training and education and mentoring to companies that are pursuing this source of funding. So I'm actually with the Minnesota Technology Association, and I'm the founder and director of the Minnesota SBIR and STTR Accelerator. So we have a national mission, and that mission is to support scientific excellence and technological innovations in small businesses by using federal research and development funding, i.e. our tax dollars to support innovation and commercialization types of activities in small businesses. Now, this is a congressionally funded program, the Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer programs. And I'm not going to go into any great detail here, but when you think about having an early stage idea or a project or a concept, and it's very technically risky, SBIR and STTR funding are really two critical sources of funding to support or de-risk that technology for further commercialization. And so these programs have been around since 1982 and 1992, respectively. And there's probably been over $50 billion awarded to small businesses all across the country since 1982. And it's resulted in some pretty significant successes that are still obviously businesses today. So the SBIR program is the largest of the programs, and each year there's about $3 billion available in the SBIR program across 11 federal agencies. Now, these agencies are interested in specific innovations, or they're willing to fund projects or opportunities that fall within their mission. And probably the largest agency that participates on the very specific area is the Department of Defense, whereas the National Institutes of Health, through the Department of Health and Human Services, is more on the granting side, where they're looking at your idea, your project that fits within their mission. Now, we like to have projects that involve our universities or colleges, nonprofit research organizations, of course, consultants, subcontractors, large companies, small businesses. So when you think about a project that fits within the SBIR program, this is primarily the most interest that companies have. It covers the spectrum of science and technology all across the board. And there's no idea or no project that probably wouldn't fit with an agency, as long as it's at the very, very early stage of R&D. Now, the STTR program is very similar to SBIR, except that it requires a small business to collaborate with a research institution. And here in Minnesota, we have the, University of Minnesota, we have Mayo Clinic, but it doesn't preclude some of the other colleges and universities in the state to participate, as long as they meet the definition of a U.S. research institution, which is defined by the National Science Foundation. So this is a collaborative research and development effort. And one thing that we like to see, especially with research that's been funded at a university by another source of federal funding, and sometimes that results in a technology that is available for licensing by that institution. This is the next pot of money to help support the continued commercialization of that technology into a new product or service or process. So this is where, as a nation, we spend enormous amounts of money at our academic institutions that hopefully result in some new innovation or new discovery that's made and that is patented and then now is available for licensing. And that STTR funding can be the next pot of funding to support that R&D effort. So what do you have to be in order to participate or to be eligible in the SBIR and STTR program? So we have seed, startup, emerging, and existing company or firms that are participating that are 500 employees or less, including their affiliates, which is a very detailed description, which I'm not going to go into today. But we're really looking for the technological innovation that has strong commercial potential. There has to be not only the science or the technology behind what you're proposing, but also what's the pathway towards commercialization. The company has to be organized for profit. It has to be located in the United States, and all the work must be done in the United States. And then one other aspect of the program that seems to get a little more attention is we want to make sure that when you're an eligible firm, that the company is owned by U.S. or resident aliens, at least 50%. So this is really, we start with the eligibility requirements first before we step in to help a company. We want to make sure that they're eligible. So what are the benefits associated with SBIR and STTR funding? Well, I think at the end of the day, it's, of course, non-dilutive funding. And it's very, very important seed money to help de-risk a technology for eventual commercialization. The company retains the intellectual property rights associated with that technology development effort. I think another component of it is this is a very rigorous and very, very competitive program. And so if you're successful as a company to seek federal funding through SBIR and STTR, there's a tremendous amount of recognition, verification, and visibility by large companies and certainly investors. One other aspect is that you maintain control of the company. The agency doesn't take a piece of the company as a result of providing a grant or a contract for your research and development efforts. And of course, it's a tool that can be used to help leverage additional funding through angels or venture capital firms. And then the last piece is the fact that with the legislation that was set up in 1982, if a company develops a technology based on SBIR or STTR funding, and it's now transitioned into a product or a service or a process, and the government has a need for that, there's the possibility of actually being awarded sole source contracts for that product or service that was developed as part of an SBIR and STTR effort. This is substantial. When we work with firms, we always keep in mind, is there something or future possibility of this being used by a federal government agency in order to meet its goals and objectives in the procurement arena, and this can result in millions of dollars of sole source contracts in what they call phase 3. So when we start with a project, we not only look at, well, what's the commercial potential in the commercial world, but also in the government procurement world, and we start with what's the funding that's possible, and then does this have a pathway towards those future opportunities in several years from now in the procurement arena. So these are the agencies that participate in the program. There are 11 in total, and 11 of them participate in SBIR, and then there are only 5 that participate in the STTR program. So when we're working with a firm on defining or determining which program to target, it could potentially involve any one of these agencies, of course, but it could also be just limited to the top 5 agencies. You might notice that it's $4 billion, and this is $4 billion every fiscal year. So these agencies have to take a percentage of their extramural R&D funding and set it aside for the SBIR and STTR programs. And that's how we arrive at about $4 billion a year. The 2 top agencies are the Department of Defense and the Department of Health and Human Services. And they make up about $3 billion of the $4 billion. So there is a number of differences among the programs, and I think the key point here is that when a firm is thinking about which program do I target, which agency, I have to keep in mind the percentage of the work that has to be done by my business. And then who is going to serve as what they call the principal investigator or the project director. This is a really important person in the scope of an SBIR and STTR. And so there's a lot of variability here, and we try to be we are strategic with our companies to make sure that they're targeting the program that meets the needs of the project and their firm. So some small businesses, they may have the internal resources or capabilities to actually do the project, or maybe they don't. And then they have to be thinking about, well, do I partner with a research institution that may have the facilities and the equipment and the expertise that's going to add value to my project? So there, an STTR program might be better fit. But we have to keep in mind all of these percentages and in both the phase 1 and the phase 2. As you can imagine, there's a lot of idiosyncrasies and nuances among these programs. And we are your Sherpa to navigate through these programs. Now, the programs are set up into 3 phases. And it used to be where you had to get it just to get a phase 1 before you could transition to phase 2 and beyond. Well, and that's most of the time that's the case. However, there are a couple of agencies that now allow companies to start at phase 2, and this is again one of those things where there's the general or the way the Congress set up the programs and set up the phases, but then there's all these nuances and idiosyncrasies among the agencies that really, I think, sometimes becomes a little more overwhelming for anyone that might be looking at this for the first time. But essentially, the phase 1 is to de-risk the technology, determine the technical feasibility of the idea, the concept of the project. And it's a small amount of money small amount. It's anywhere from 250, anywhere from 150,000 all the way up to actually 700,000 with one agency. But the goal is to de-risk the technology enough to make the decision to invest millions of dollars in phase 2. And phase 2 is where the principal R&D effort is actually being done. And I always sort of look at it as the prototype stage of a new product development effort. And there's, again, depending upon the agency, the funding levels vary. And then in phase 3, this is where, again, we're looking at transitioning this towards the commercial markets or the government marketplace. There's no funding in phase 3 per se, but there are other sources of funding that are not coded as SBIR or STTR funding that can help support the phase 3 effort. So the projects, so what do we look for? We have different projects and ideas or concepts, and all across the spectrum of science and technology, R&D, et cetera. But what we're really looking for is what's novel, what's transformative, what's never been done before, that if it was proven to be successful and technically feasible, that there's a strong potential for commercialization. And so we always start with the end in mind. What is it that you're trying to commercialize? What's the unmet market need that exists? And all the agencies now require, as a part of the phase 1 proposal, a discussion about the market opportunity that exists for that proposed product or service or process. And so this is where we start with, it's all about commercialization. We're taking something from an idea stage all the way towards the marketplace. And so we have these phases that come in and help support that effort. I always look at what's the commercial potential worldwide, and then what are the possibilities for sales or licensing, if that's a strategy for the company. And then, of course, what's the potential for intellectual property. So we have a lot of companies that develop technologies, and as a result of the R&D effort, new IP is generated based on that R&D. And then another factor is the agencies are very much interested in additional investments to support the commercialization pathway. And so this is not, so if you have a startup, of course, you're going to have other outside capital to help support your company and the commercialization pathway. If you're an existing company, maybe you have the internal resources to help support that. The goal is you can't just simply, develop something on SBIR, STTR funding alone. It just is impossible anymore. So we also look at, how do we define innovation or transformative ideas or concepts? And so this is the standard definition that's used by a federal agency or by Congress. And, it's very broad, of course. And so we spend a tremendous amount of time really talking with our clients about what's the proposed project, what needs to be done, and does it make has it a good fit for a phase 1 project? And then how do we define research? And I'm certainly not going to go through this, but every project is different. And I always use the description that, what is it that you need to know that you don't know today? And maybe that's a good place to start to define what the research will consist of. Or the other approach is to ask, well, what are the technical questions that need to be answered in order to demonstrate technical feasibility? And those questions lead to technical objectives and tasks that if you completed them, you would have an anticipated outcome. So this is very much, it's not basic research, but it's applied research. And so if I always use if you were at an academic institution doing research and development, the SBIR and STTR programs is very much aligned with that kind of a mindset, except it's in the applied research space and the focus is to develop a new product or service or process. Basic research does not have a product development focus, whereas SBIR and STTR does. So how do you become competitive? As I said earlier, these programs are highly competitive. And I, have been doing this for a very long time, since 1994, and I can certainly attest to the changes that have occurred with the programs. We start with the commercialization opportunity, start with the end in mind. What's the market need? What's the potential? What's your strategy? And maybe you don't have the answers to all those questions today, but you really need to sort that out prior to stepping into a project that you would like to propose to an agency. What are the technical gaps that exist? What's the game-changing, disruptive about your project or your idea? Is there, certainly commercial or military potential? And then what is the scientific or technical literature say in your space? These are scholarly documents, so they have many citations. And your job is to communicate to the reviewers at the agency that you understand the state of the art and that you're well aware of the literature that exists in your space. Now, we spent a fair amount of time trying to connect your project with the agency, the solicitation, the research, topics, and so forth. And this, again, I'll go in a little bit detail, but we have specific topics, and then there are very broad, what we call PI initiated projects, principal investigator initiated projects. And there's a really important, this is an important step to make a good match between what you're proposing to do and the agency that potentially has the funding to help support that. We look at who are the people and the organizations that are coming together to support this project. As I said earlier, the PI, the project director, is a really important person. And if it's an STTR project, then that PI can be from the academic institution. We look at team members, internally, externally, subcontractors, consultants, strategic partnerships. You need letters, key opinion leader letters, letters of support, letters of agreement. And of course, where are you going to do the work? Do you have the free facilities, equipment, and expertise to carry out the research that you're proposing to do? There are many, many aspects to putting together a high-quality research proposal. And we don't expect our companies to know that. And that's why we offer our accelerator cohorts to help people navigate through that process. So here's a little more description about the PIs. A very important role on an SBIR, STTR project. And I talked about that already. So let's talk about the cost proposal. So with any of these agencies, they have multiple solicitations throughout the year and multiple topics, and then they have different funding levels depending upon the agency. But those, what you're allowed to request is either a set amount or there's some flexibility, as there is with the National Institutes of Health. But the costs, the budget can cover salaries and wages and travel, materials or supplies, animal studies, human clinical trials. These are just some of the costs that are allowed. And then there's the indirect costs, what we call G&A and overhead, that can help support the operation of the business. And then there's a small profit or fee. I refer to this as the profit margin. And generally it's 7%. So when we think about a project, we're looking at all the direct costs, those things that are directly related to the scope of work. And then we take a portion of whatever the indirect costs are to operating the business, and then this profit or fee. And so that pretty much makes up the budget. And for phase one, sometimes we're up in the $250,000, $300,000, $400,000, depending upon the agency. And then phase 2 is of course in the millions to support the continued development of that concept of that project into a product. So what are the differences? I always refer to the agencies as children because they each have their own personality and their own way of doing business. And the processes are different, the topics are different, the requirements are different, and the funding levels are different. I mean, it used to be really easy to explain the programs, not anymore, because it's really very much focused on which agency, which phase, and then what are their requirements to put together a quality research proposal that's responsive to what they're looking for or what they're willing to fund. So how do we fit into this picture? So we're funded through the Small Business Administration and through the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development to help Minnesota companies navigate through these programs to compete and win federal funding. We also have support through the University of Minnesota Technology Commercialization Office and the Home Center for Entrepreneurship. And we also have funding through the Mayo Clinic Office of Entrepreneurship, and we're heavily supported through Launch Minnesota and our host organization, the Minnesota Technology Association. And then we also work very closely with MinCore, which in their value proposition design courses. So our goal is to increase the number of SBIR and STTR proposals submitted by Minnesota firms. Our goal is to help you get to the winner's circle and then to help you support your commercialization success. So here are some of the companies that we've been involved with over the years, and you probably recognize a few of them. And you know, from since we were got our start in 2014 and until now, we've worked with over 50 companies to win about $50 million in funding. So what's been the overall impact of SBIR and STTR funding in Minnesota? It's $832 million and growing. And you know, lots of jobs, products and services. But I think what's even more important is the angel or venture capital investments that have come in, the companies that have either gone through a merger or acquisition. We have several that have gone through IPOs. We have technology licensing in and out, IP, et cetera. And of course, the sole source contracts and global sales. Huge impact. So we focus our efforts on, you know, helping qualified companies, startups, all the way up to 500 employees if they want to participate. But we have these focus cohorts, and our cohorts are focused on the NIH, which has about a $1.2 billion SBIR and STTR fund. The National Science Foundation, which is about $250 million, and then the small Department of Defense is $1.8 billion. And then we also support the other agencies or companies that are seeking funding through the other agencies through an on-demand model. But we have 10 cohorts throughout the year, and we probably work with over 50 companies to prepare and submit their applications in response to the agency that they're targeting. As you can imagine, I'm very busy, but it's been quite a ride since 1994, helping a lot of companies in Minnesota navigate through these programs. So here are some of the other things that we, you know, get involved in, and as you can imagine, the federal R&D and procurement world is a very complicated environment. We try to make it easier for people to navigate through the programs and understand this world of federal R&D grants and contracts. But it is quite a hurdle sometimes to navigate through those things. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and I'll answer any questions. So the question here is, does research include clinical trials? Yes.
Hi, Pat.
Hi.
Sorry,
Yes.
I'm having a hard time with technology. Thanks for answering that, and great presentation.
Yeah, it was very quick. It's very quick.
And there's so much going on that it's been a little challenging with the schedule to line everything up. So,
okay. So what company are you with that you're looking at clinical trials?
So I work with a serial entrepreneur. I'm in his business development kind of fundraising arm.
Okay.
He it's interesting. He has an IT consulting business in town, 250 employees, like sizable, right? And he uses it essentially as an incubator to come up with some interesting solutions to pressing problems.
Okay.
So the one that we're working on specific to SBIR is we have come across a really innovative solution for tinnitus.
Say that again.
We have a solution. We have a provisional patent for a hearing solution for tinnitus.
Oh, yes. Okay, very cool. Yeah, that's a big problem. That's a big problem in the Department of Defense or with veterans. Yeah.
Right. And so this is an interesting area where, for looking at funding, looking at the process for applying. And it's a little bit of an area that's new to me. I'm more experienced in the venture world.
Okay,
so
yeah.
Learning this. And Pat, you've been in this business since 1994. How do you work with, kind of early stage? Like we do, we have let's say we have a process that we're now trying to bring into a device and prototype it and heading toward clinical trials. Our process has been very effective with people that we've tried.
Oh, yeah, okay.
We have endorsements from like leading scientists across the country, right? But how do we think about timing and just simply applying? Like I think the DoD is where we are most interested, but how would we work with you?
So the first thing is, and this is in response to a question here, how do I choose companies? So so the National Science Foundation uses this tool called the Project Pitch. We use the same tool to gather information, and it's on our website at www.mtech.org/MNSBIR. I'll put it in the chat here. So we use this questionnaire, basically. It's 5 questions, and we want to know about the technology, the innovation. We want to know what do you think the technical objectives are for the project. We want to know information about the company and the team. And then, of course, the market opportunity. And then lastly, and NSF doesn't require this, but I do. I want to know if you're, aware of the state of the art as far as scientific or technical literature that supports the project. So when people apply and they submit this information, then I can read through it and I can assess which agency, are they ready? Because this is a very intense process to go through and prepare an application in response to any agency. And it isn't always about the science. It includes the business information. What's the market opportunity? And if I would say that any scientist or engineer or, startup company in particular, sometimes they don't understand. I mean, if they're really true startup, they're in that science technology space. They don't know who their customers are, first of all, and they don't know what the size of the market is or what's really, really possible for them. So, going back to the question about how do I choose the companies, it's that application, and then it's certainly a conversation, or sometimes a conversation occurs first and then the application follows. But it is it's kind of a combined decision whether to pursue this funding or not, because this is a major undertaking. To do one project, one submission is probably close to 150 to 200 hours of time and effort to get everything pulled together. And that meaning the budget of the technical proposal, doing the scientific and technical literature review, getting letters of support, pulling your team together to support the project. So it's a major undertaking, and it's not to be taken lightly. And we try to make it easier, but it's it's federal R&D. What can I say? There's lots of rules and regs and requirements, and it's not for everyone. And I think the other component of this is that we have lots of people that have lots of ideas or concepts. Does it fit the definition of technological innovation or transformation by the agencies? And then sometimes this is just simply a conversation that we have to have with the people at the federal agency to make sure that it is a good fit. Because we really don't want people spending hundreds of hours putting together a proposal that doesn't have a chance. And that's what I really like about the NSF project pitch. Is it really, 2-3 pages of a description of your proposed project, and if it doesn't meet the requirements, then you haven't spent 150 hours, 200 hours putting together a proposal. And that's, NSF is, they are the bleeding edge of science and engineering in the country. That's their mission. They just happen to have this actually SBIR actually got its start at NSF in the late 70s as a pilot program, which then led to the legislation in 1982, which was signed into law by President Reagan. So this is, we try to demystify the process for people that are new to it, because we know how overwhelming it can be. I've lived through it many, many times. So.
Hi, Pat.
Hi.
Good to see you. It's been a little bit. So our technology is a medical ultrasound for children, but with potential adult applications down the road. Our just initial use cases are around babies and children. And it's automated ultrasound, so it's a little bit, that's our novel thing that doesn't exist today. So what's changed from our early U of M grant for proof of concept to now is that we have a Minnesota company, a Delaware C Corp, and also have a Hong Kong business entity, because a good chunk of our engineering team is in Hong Kong, embedded in the science park. And so I was curious if any of the rules had changed, because we're just now getting to the place where we want to apply for STTR. And I wasn't sure, based on agency, if the rules had changed around being able to do collaborative projects for US and having an overseas team involved. And I know in the past you could, and it wasn't an issue, but I wasn't sure if I need to be wary of that now.
Well, you could have that team in Hong Kong participate, but you cannot use any federal funding to support that part of the project.
I see.
So all of the work has to be done in the United States, and that if you're going to use project federal funding, all that work has to be done in the United States. Doesn't preclude that work over in Hong Kong. It just has to be paid by some other source of funding.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Well, I shot you a note to try to follow up. I love your kind of guidance or recommendations on best possible pathway for a imminent submission. I just think I felt like I used to know like 3 years ago the pathway, and now I'm less confident about the pathway. Further along, more confident in the tech, less confident about the pathway.
Yeah, so I got a cohort going on right now, and we just kicked it off last week. So if you can, so you sent me an email.
I didn't. I sent you a LinkedIn note.
Okay.
It was just easier, low-hanging fruit to send you.
Yeah, just send me something via my email address here, and I will send you my presentation from last week, and then I'll have you apply, and then we can get started. And
Okay.
So of course the next deadline is January, right? Yep. So you're targeting NIH. You could probably also target NSF, the National Science Foundation, because they do support biomedical research.
Yeah, and I've never done that before.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. But that for NIH, NHLBI, I think I'm sure. I feel like if we spent like 15 minutes together, you'd probably be like, okay, I know. Like it's just.
Well, yeah, this is what's so hard about SBIR is that, especially, because it is the topics, research areas are all across the spectrum.
Yep.
It is. And so the best way that I can describe like NIH funding is anything to do with the human body. It's biomedical, it's behavioral, it's, public health, it's, all sorts of things. So it's really, and this is where it gets to be challenging, but it's not. If you can conceive it, then, there's a possibility, of getting funding to support that.